Thomas A. Taylor. I was born in Churchill, Virginia, in the 1300 block on 26th Street. Did not go to the hospital, was born at home. There were 8 of us, 4 boys, 4 girls. And there are now 3 of us, 2 boys and 1 girl. I was the last. They stopped with me. My dad died when I was 3, and my mom died when I was 8. So it took the rest of them to kind of pull everything together. And some of them weren't that much older than I was, but my older sister who was there and dropped out of high school to take care of the rest of us. And unfortunately, again, my dad worked for the railroad, so we had his money that came in to help keep the house going. I don't remember my dad a lot, but I do remember my mom. And she wasn't a tall lady, she wasn't a big lady, but she controlled everything. She never worked because my dad worked, and she had a job taking care of the children. You know, we had home, we had a house, we had a home, had everything that everybody else had. I don't know how, you know, I can assume they really struggled to keep things going, but that says a lot at that time. I'm thinking that was a big to-do, especially at that time for a black man working on the railroad to buy a home for his family. So the house was important to me. It was really important to me because that's what I knew. That was home. It was a 2-story. Had and at first they lived there. They lived downstairs, and some other people lived upstairs, and eventually they just bought the house. But there was 8 rooms, 4 bedrooms. Realizing that there's a 20-year gap between my oldest sister and me. So she and my older brother were gone just about when I came along. My brother was in the military, and my older sister she got married in the 50s. But she was gone. And plus, she stayed a lot with my grandmother on Ford Avenue. I came up like an only child because the rest of them were kind of clumped together, and then I came along. And living there, there were several kids in the neighborhood, especially on various streets. You know, at that time, everybody knew everybody. If I lived on 26th, I knew people on 28th, 29th, 30th. It was just everything was close, even though it was not right there together. And we had different people, different neighborhoods, but we all seemed to get along, and nobody was better than anybody else. We were all poor and didn't know it. That's a good way to describe it. We all played together. You know, everybody played together. And I played a lot in my backyard. I had a swing. We had swings they bought, and I had swing in the backyard, but most of the time we played in the backyard. A lot of times we just out in the street, whatever was out in the street. And we played football on a field at the corner of 27th and R, between 26th and 27th and R, right there by Manning's funeral home. So when they had a funeral over there, we couldn't play. Well, that's Manning's where they were first located before they moved down to 25th and M. There was another funeral home called J. Everett Price, which was on 25th Street, on 25th between R and Q. And they used to. They actually had, the funeral home was in a house, and I remember that, and it was kind of scary if you went there to see a body. Yeah, you had to go upstairs to view the bodies. That was some time ago. Well, at that time, there was a downtown Richmond, but we could get anything we wanted right there on Churchill. on the corner of 25th and 25th and Q was a place called Haynes Wilson, and they sold shoes. And there's, for Thanksgiving, for Easter, that's where you got your new shoes for Easter there. There was a jewelry store called Clark's Jewelry Store right down the corner of, it was on Q Street between 26th and 25th. And then there was it was what they call a 5 and dime store, like a penny, and that was on the corner. And then there was a High's ice cream store right there. All three were right there together on Q Street. And of course, on Sundays, people go to High's to buy ice cream and whatever. Those are the types of things I remember. I don't remember not having anything, although I'm sure I didn't have a lot of things. Christmas was always a big thing, and if you got 5, 6, 7, 8 brothers and sisters, the Christmas tree everything was under that Christmas tree. You couldn't get through the living room because the Christmas gifts were all laid out on the floor. Christmas was a big thing. Thanksgiving was a big thing when we all got together and ate and had a nice time. Got together and everybody was living at that time. Most of my memories are my brothers and sisters because, again, I was 8 when my mother died. I remember most is that I got a beating for eating a piece of chicken that I wasn't supposed to eat. It was for somebody else. I don't know if the preacher was coming by that day or something or whatever. Preachers come by on Sunday, they get the biggest piece of chicken. But I don't know if it's because of the chicken or just what. And that's what I remember most about her. I know that she belonged to a club called the Travelers Club, and she used to go traveling a lot. And they used to have cooking contests, and she won the contest, I know, 2 or 3 times. Members used to come by. I remember they used to have club meetings at the house. But the biggest impact is probably my brothers and sisters because that's when I got to be older. When I got to school, when I went to elementary school, they knew my brothers and sisters. So they, you don't mess up because they know your brothers and sisters. And they taught somebody and they taught somebody else in your family or whatever. And then they remember you. Sometimes they remember your parents because I know I had my brother next to me. He used to do some things, and my other brother used to play games in school instead of paying attention. I remember a teacher named Mr. Sweat used to always come after 3 o'clock. He used to come around and see him. He used to walk. He didn't have a car. He used to come around and come in the house and talk to my mother about my brother, about what he had done or what he hadn't done. And then I used to be out in the front yard playing, and then Mr. Sweat would leave. And this was before I got to I was in George Mason. And Mr. Sweat would leave, and he never had a car. I just thought it was odd that the teacher never had a car. But he used to catch the bus, and he was a member of, how I know this, he used to be a member of Ebenezer Baptist Church. He was a deacon up there. And when I got a little older, I used to see him over there. And that was special. Because I remember Mr. Sweat used to come around my house and talk to my mom about my brother, which is probably, you don't have it today. You won't have it today. You don't have teachers going to people's houses and talking about their kids and what they need to do and discipline and that kind of thing. You just respected people. There was so much respect going on there, and you just didn't mess up. Punishment then was different. You got a slap or hit upside the head. That was punishment. Let's call it brutality in there. It wasn't brutal then. It was a thing. It was what you got. I got it when I ate that chicken. Church was different. Church was different. There were so many churches. Church Hill didn't get his name by accident. There was almost a church on every corner. So there was Cedar Street, there was Mount Tabor, there was Good Shepherd. All of them within 5 minutes of each other, walking. So, and then people who grew up there, who lived around that way, they joined the various churches. So that's how the families were actually split. My family belonged to two churches. My dad belonged to Mount Olivet, which was on the corner of 25th and S, and my mother belonged to Fourth Baptist, which was on the corner of 28th and P. But my aunt, my mom's sister, belonged to Mount Tabor. And usually, where you grew up is where what church you joined. For some reason or another, you didn't do anything on Sunday, but the first thing you did was go to church. You didn't play outside, not in my house. You didn't play outside or go outside until after church was over. And one thing was because you saw everybody and you didn't want people to know you didn't go to church that Sunday. I remember that there was, on the corner was a family called Cummings, Mr. Thomas Cummings and Virginia Cummings. And they walked to church every Sunday. They walked every Sunday. And you look for them every Sunday. And they went to Mount Olivet and they walked around the corner. And then they come back and they sent all their kids to Mount Olivet. They had a lot of kids too. One of them was Dr. Cummings, who was a physician. And they had a son called Thomas Cummings, or nickname was Bo. He did a lot of singing around Richmond. Just going to church, and everybody knew everybody at church. That was the amazing thing, that everybody knew everybody at church. And churches, sometimes then they used to have services in the evenings, on a Sunday evening, and people would always dress up. You put on your Sunday best. It wasn't anything like now where kids wear jeans or whatever. You put on your Sunday best and you went to church. And you respected the minister and everybody who was at the church. At that time, the churches used to, remember, they called excursions in the summer. The excursions used to be to Buckrow Beach. And it was nothing to see Mount Olivet carrying 25 or 30 buses, or Fourth Baptist carrying 50 or 60 buses. I mean, they used to go on the train. Now, and that was the thing, to ride the train to the beach. That was big to do. And then they got away from the train, and they just took the buses down. And you were there all day. Now, I used to get tired of being there all day. But you were there all day until late in the evenings, and they come back. But it was, the beach was crowded, full of people, not just from Richmond, but people from everywhere else was at Buckrow Beach. I can't remember which one was Buckrow. I don't know which one was Segregation. One was Buckrow and one was Bay Shore. One was for colored, one was for white. I do remember they had a fence down in the middle of the beach, out into the water, and that separated the two. So you didn't go over to the white beach. You stayed on the other side. Big difference in them now. You ride it down. They've done a great thing with getting rid of the fence and all the things. But you went down there during the summer, and then you used to have people. They were eating oysters. They were eating hard shell crabs. There was a place you went to change your clothes, and I forgot what they call it. Whatever, shower or whatever. But you go there and you change your clothes, and before you go to the water, and there was a hoppy horse or merry-go-round or something like that there, and you had games and you had rides, and it was a day. It was a day, and then you caught the bus, or if you were on the train. When we caught the train, you used to catch the train to I guess they called it Lee Hall, and then you catch Lee Hall. You caught the bus. They ran buses from there over to the beach, which was in Phoebus. They called it Phoebus, and turned around and did the same thing, except when you start catching just the buses now, then the buses would pull up, and you just got to remember which bus you were on, and people checked to make sure that everybody was there, nobody was being left behind, and it wasn't their responsibility, but it happened because people care about each other. That during the summer, and Bible school, and who wanted to go to Bible school? But you went anyway because they always gave you treats. You always had something good to eat. And that kind of thing went on. And it got people together. And all the churches were, all the churches did the same thing basically. So, if you went to Bible school at Mount Olivet, you might sneak around and go to Bible school at Fort Baptist. That's just the way it was. And then nobody turned anybody away. I started out at George Mason, and that's what mostly everybody went. On one side of 9 Mile Road, you went to George Mason. On the other side of 9 Mile Road, you might have gone to Woodville. That was basically the two elementary schools. I forgot there's a Fairmount Elementary School. Then there was, I think, Nathaniel Bacon. Nathaniel Bacon, that came along later. And then there was J. Andrew Bowler, which was down toward Broad Street. Everybody went to various elementary schools, but as the older you got and the more education you got closer to the school you went to. So they started East End Junior High School about 3 years before I left George Mason. I was about the third class to go to East End. And from there, we went to Armstrong. And my class was so large that some of us could not go to Armstrong. They had not have enough room there. So some of us stayed at East End for an extra year, and then they came over. And that wasn't unusual because you had a lot of kids from Southside who came from other schools. They came over in the 10th grade. I think Maggie Walker always started in 10th grade. So at Armstrong, we had a variety of people. You had kids in the 9th who went over in the 9th. And then before me, much time before me, before they had East End, because East End didn't come about until about 62, 63. A lot of the kids went from elementary school straight to high school. So they went to high school in 7th, 8th grade, sometimes 7th grade, sometimes 8th grade. When you got to high school, kids came from everywhere. I remember there was a family on 27th Street called the Collins family. Which was unusual about them was they had two brothers who were close in age. One went to Armstrong, one went to Maggie Walker, and they both played on the football team. So when they had the Armstrong-Walker game, that was interesting to see who was who. But that wasn't unusual to see kids living in Churchill going to Maggie Walker. My older sister and my older brother went to Maggie Walker. But the ones on the lower end, like, in the last, there were 7. I mean, 6 of us close together. I said about 10-year span. We all went to Armstrong. You had to catch the bus to get there. Everybody else was used to just walking down to Armstrong. Now, realizing that Armstrong, the one that was just torn down, was put over there in 1950, 51. So a lot of people before that time went to Armstrong, which was located downtown on Lee Street, which is not far from Maggie Walker. So we went to the new high school. We went to the new Armstrong. We didn't have busing. There was no busing then. If you went to Maggie Walker, it's because you wanted to go. If you went to Armstrong, it's because you wanted to go. It just happened that there were no yellow buses or anything. You called the GRTC or whatever they called it at that time. You went there and caught it, and you went downtown, go to school. My sister took me to the first Armstrong Walker game in 1960. She was in high school. I went there, and from there on, I said I wanted to play in that game. The game, I don't know if you know, the game speaks for itself. It was where everybody went on the Saturday after Thanksgiving. It was buses with streamers and orange and blue and green and white, and we talking about at the city stadium where somewhere in the neighborhood of 25, maybe 30,000 people. If you wanted to kill all the black people, just drop a bomb there on Thanksgiving, the Saturday after Thanksgiving, and you'll kill everybody in Richmond. The stores are closed, everything. Yeah. Not many people weren't at that game. I started my last 2 years, my 11th and 12th grade year. Nervous, scared. You see all those people that look like bees in the stands. It was just, and everybody's watching you. But you know, there was a sense of pride because you were playing a crosstown rival, and you wanted to do good, and you did good. You did the best you could. Maggie Walker won both games. They won both games. The win and loss is a thing, but just to be able to play, it's like playing at the Apollo. You know, whether you do good or bad, you played at the Apollo. And, same thing. Played at City Stadium on the Saturday after Thanksgiving. I went to school. I went to Armstrong High School. I went to George Mason. I went to Richmond Public Schools. I wouldn't change anything because I was just as happy. I think I got an education just as much as it did if at any other schools. I think that the black teachers did a fine job. They knew you. They knew your family. They took time with you. You weren't a number. And they treated you like you were somebody, and you, in return, respected them and treated them as they were persons who demanded and commanded respect. I know that when I was in elementary school, I played in the band, and I played the trumpet in the band, and they couldn't afford to buy me a trumpet. So we used one of the trumpets at the school, and I always wanted to get my own trumpet. And there were some kids there whose parents bought them instruments, and I never had my own instrument. And I used to feel bad, but I was good at playing. I was good at playing my instrument. I like to think I was good because the band teacher at George Mason was also the band teacher at Armstrong. So I had a period in between there when I went to East End. I didn't play in a band. And then when I got over to Armstrong, I bumped into the band teacher, and he asked me, was I going to play in the band? I said, no. He said, I want you to play in the band. I said, no, I don't want to play in the band. And that made me feel good because he wanted me to play in the band. If he didn't want me to, he wouldn't have asked me to. So I'm always thinking I was good enough to play in his band. You can't miss what you never had. And we never had integration, so we couldn't miss it. Like I said, everybody was happy. Everybody got along well. When I say everybody got along well, there was a closeness in segregation. There was a real closeness in segregation, I think. That is not there now as a result of integration. I didn't have a problem with the segregation until I went to college. And when I realized that people came from other places and they talked about the segregation and realizing that I was in my second year of college when Martin Luther King was killed. And it all came out then. But I worked at Tallheimers every year while I was in college. Every year I worked there, every summer, every Christmas. And I know that they had a Richmond room. There was a restaurant on the fourth floor in Tallheimers, is where the ritzy people ate. And you could see then that there was still some semblances of segregation. But I never, growing up, I never knew what segregation was because we all had the same things. I never went to see what they had or what white kids had. I know that in high school, especially in the spring and track season, I competed against some white kids from other parts of the city. We ran doing AAU track, and you saw that they had different pieces of equipment and different uniforms, nothing like ours, but it didn't bother you so much as to know that, there were white people there who looked at you kind of funny. And I guess black people looked at them too. So I can't talk a lot about segregation except that I know it existed. I know that white people were white people and black people were black people. And I know that in Tallheimers, I worked in the stock room on bedding and linen. And on the fourth floor, on the side where the bedding and linen was stored, there was a sign that said bathroom for colored or for whites. And you knew what that meant, but it didn't bother you so much because I didn't have to go there to enjoy myself, or I didn't have to go there to do anything that I needed. Now I know in Armstrong, my last 2 or 3 years, there were white teachers. There were some white teachers, maybe one or two. One was a guy who taught Russian. But basically, everything was still segregated. Even though Brown had been passed, everything was still segregated. That was 1954. I didn't start school until 1955, but it didn't change anything in the Richmond area. There was still segregation. And I think that segregation had its strengths. And I think I came along at the time that it had its strengths. I guess when I was going up to school, we started to integrate. I mean, you could start to go to movies downtown. The movies on that one block on Broad Street where the National is. There were 3 movies in that block. Blacks started to go to the movies. We could go to movies. Before that time, on Church Hill, we probably went to the East End and the Robinson Theater. You used to be able to hear Reds pushing popcorn boxes across the floor in the Robinson Theater. But now you're moving up to theaters on Broad Street. And there was integration going on. And that was, you started to go in stores and you started to go to restaurants. Blacks used to always go on Sundays. It was a big thing to go to 2nd Street and eat in the restaurants down there. But once you start to integrate, you start to go to different restaurants in different places. And that came about in the late 60s. That was really into the late 60s, probably the early 70s more than anything else. When I went away to school, we enjoyed school. And there were a lot of blacks and I went to HBCU. And whites you couldn't go to like white schools like University of Virginia or University of Richmond. I can't think of anybody from my class that went to University of Virginia. And I finished in 67. I think there was one young lady who went to University of Richmond who finished Armstrong in 66. And that was locally. Now, outside of the state, I think they probably went to white schools outside of the state because, again, integration has started to pick up a little bit. Not so much in Virginia as well as other places. Virginia, I think, was kind of slow. Growing up on Church Hill, when it snowed, my brothers used to have sleighs. And we used to take the sleighs and go around to Chimborazo Park. And there was a hill in Chimborazo Park that went down and he dropped off into Fulton. White people lived around there. Whites were all over in Chimborazo, and they gradually moved out. And I remember some guys saying that, and I heard stories of white people living on a certain side of North Avenue or Brooklyn Park Boulevard doing segregation, and white people lived on the other side, and eventually the white people moved out. So what's happening now is the same. It's repeating itself. Blacks moved in, whites moved out. Now whites moving in, and blacks are being pushed out. Strangely enough, I think back on it, and I guess I'm a part of it. One of my first jobs out of undergraduate school was with the Richmond Redevelopment and Housing Authority under community development. And they used to call it, what I did was relocation. We were working in Fulton, we were working in the West End, we were working in Washington Park. And you go in, well, we had the jobs, everybody in relocation was basically black. You had the job of going in and moving people out, helping them to find another place to go, so that supposedly community development would come in and tear down houses or rehabilitate houses. But that was just another form of urban renewal, which was what they used when they came down through town and through downtown and moved the black people out years ago. And urban renewal or Negro removal, it was the same. It's always the same, and I feel like that's the bad part about it. I feel like I was a part of that Negro removal. Some people, it benefited some people, but I don't think it benefited blacks a lot. I think they call it gentrification, but it's just another name for urban renewal or Negro removal. You come in and you move the blacks out, and young whites, how they get the money, where they get it from. They're building on lots. A lot of houses are being built over there where blacks live, and I guess it's kind of the blacks who came out of families who owned homes didn't come back, and that left it open for whites to come in and take advantage of the land. And Churchill I think is probably one of the best places you would want to live if you look at the situation there, how the land is situated. But we're going through gentrification, and it's not just in Richmond; it's everywhere. It's all over the country. It's urban renewal and move blacks out, and Negro removal move blacks out, and gentrification is moving blacks out. And some blacks can afford to go into higher income neighborhoods, but a lot of them can't, and they're moving to the fringes of the cities, into houses that are starting to be deteriorated, or houses that are starting to go down here. But they're moving on the outside of where gentrification is taking place. In my family plot, there are four: my mother, my father, my oldest sister, and one brother. John Taylor was my father, and Ora B. Taylor was my mother, and Emily R. Ampey, or T. Ampey, was my sister, and Clarence S. Taylor is my brother. My grandparents are probably in Evergreen. I remember my grandmother's funeral, not my grandfather's funeral. And this is on my mother's side. There was a wrought iron fence I remember that on the day we went down there for the funeral to lay my grandmother to rest. And it was a wrought iron fence they had around their section, and it was just my grandfather in there who had been buried there. His name was John Brown. And they were further down, way down in the back in Evergreen, I remember. And of course, Manning's funeral home was the ones that buried everybody, most of them. And I remember my mother's funeral. And at that time, I don't know, what they used to do then was they used to lead, instead of having a funeral home, the bodies used to be in the family at the home. And they used to be in my living room. They in the family living room. My mother's body was laid in the living room. And I used to be scared, so I stayed next door. When my mother died, I stayed next door at the people's home next door. And when they had to go to work in the morning, I used to have to come back and come through the back door and come past my mother's casket and all laid there. And that was real touching then, because losing my mother at an early age. On Easter, the kids used to wear red carnations and white carnations. The red carnation meant that your parents were living, and your white carnation meant that your parents were dead. And I had to, I didn't like wearing a white carnation because I didn't like the fact that my parents were running around. Because, everybody had their own parents. And not everybody, but most of them had their own parents in the block in the neighborhood. And I know that my dad had, when my dad had died, my mother bought a plot. And she put him in there. And it supposedly at that time, it was supposed to be that plot was supposed to have enough space for 8 people. But since then, caskets got bigger and vaults are going, so no way you could get 8 in there. We're lucky to get 4. But I remember that plot. And when my mother was buried there, right after my mother was buried there, every year we went down there to take care of Mom's grave. Every year we went down there. Somebody, at least 4 or 5 of us went down there to take care of the grave. And my oldest brother wouldn't go, so he got in touch with, my oldest brother was up in age then. He died last year. If he were living, he would be 84, 85. So, but he hired this guy, he used to pay this guy named Thomas Miles, of white folks, who was down there all the time in East End and Evergreen, cleaning lots, cleaning graves, cutting grass, and he paid him to go down there. So basically, when we went down there, we just wanted to put flowers in because white folks had cleaned everything off by the time we got down there. At least, I don't know what it looked like after we left, or 2 months after we left, but when we got down there every Memorial Day, it was cleaned off. Everything was fine, and we just put flowers in. But that was a ritual. That was a ritual after my mother died. The only thing I can say, his name is Thomas Miles, and he used to live on Q Street in the 2800 block on Q Street. And he was, for lack of a better word, a hustler. I mean a hustler. He worked at the fair. He worked at the circus. He did everything. He went to the dump. He hauled trash. He did it all. He was a self-made man. And everybody knew him. And we used to go to, in later years, we used to go to the same barbershop. And you could always tell when he was in the barbershop because he used to always smell. He smelled real bad because he had been out working and old dead fish and anything. He was a hustler. He didn't harm anybody. He was just white folks, and that's what he did. He looked white. He really did. He said he used to go to Atlantic City and people used to holler, "Oh, that's white folks." He said, "Y'all talking about me?" He was a comedian, but he looked white. His hair he looked just like a white guy. He looked white, but he was black. My family takes care of its plot, and we're not the only ones. There are some others who come down there and take care of their plots. I still go to cemetery. But we started to fade off. People started to fade off. The people who used to come and take care of the plots started to die off. White folks died off. Families were dying off. And that's probably what's happening now. I'm getting older, so I can't continue to go down there, but it was just engulfed. It was just overtaken by weeds and debris. And that happened because the people who were taking care of the plots were dying off. So what used to be a big to-do on Memorial Day, when I say a big to-do, you couldn't find parking spaces down there because everybody was down there taking care of the spots, taking care of the plots, looking out for the deceased family members. And when it started to die off, that's when you saw the debris start to take over. And then you couldn't find plots, you couldn't find graves because the people who used to come couldn't come. We lived on 26th Street in 1300 block. And the 1300 block on 25th Street was a man last name Singleton. He, at that time, as far as I knew, was the owner of the cemetery. He and uh, his wife used to run a daycare, because I stayed at the daycare when I was growing up too. The daycare used to be on Venable Street in the church. There's a church the church is still there. Across the street, on one side is Great Hope, on the other side is a church. I can't think of the name of the church. But there used to be a daycare in that basement, and I used to stay there after school, elementary school. Because in that same block, there used to be a doctor named Dr. Plotkin, Plotkin, Plotkin. And he was where everybody went to the doctor. Next door to the Singletons lived the named Miss Harris. Miss Harris married Earl Grey. But Miss Harris lived next door to the Singletons. Strangely enough, when I was in the 10th grade, I went to summer school and took a history class that was taught by Miss Gray. So, I told her where I lived behind her, and she knew my older sisters, and they took over the cemetery under the auspices of an association, with Earl Grey being one of the members at the time. I don't know if he was in charge or he was a chairman or not, but he was a member. He was the last member I remember who was involved with that cemetery. So that's how I got to know who he was, and plus he was the grand potentate of the Masons, which is, that's saying something, because Masons are big. I always thought that whoever owned the cemetery was taking care of it, and never thinking about who owned it, other than I knew that Mr. Singleton used to own East End, and then he passed it on to his family members, who was Mr. and Miss Gray. And I know they were up in age. I just never thought that the roads need to be taken care of, and who owns the roads. I know we own the plot. I never knew who owned the roads, but I knew that somebody in the white cemeteries was taking care of them, because their roads were paved. If you go through them now, you see a lot of them paved, never knowing that the General Assembly was allocating funds for that. And I think that needs to be done with East End and Evergreen and wherever else that black people that were being buried. Can't be forgotten. It's just as much history there as it is in the white cemeteries. I mean, there's so many people who get buried and nobody goes back to check on the site to make sure it's cleaned off, or make sure that the family is remembered. That's a big part of it, is being remembered. Everybody's now talking about their lineage, where they come from. I came from Germany. I came from West Africa. I came from Ethiopia. But right now, if you don't keep this, you won't have history. You won't have that history. History be gone. Something should be done, or it should be maintained and considered to be maintained, because it's black history. And I just think that what's being done here is a great opportunity to maintain and have history preserved, for lack of a better word.